Good morning to you from the windy shores of Chain Lakes and Chain Lakes Provincial Park. Here along the Cowboy Trail, Highway 22, we're making our way down into southern Alberta, the Crowsnest Pass area. No real destination at all today, just a good old-fashioned road trip. And I just lost the wind cover from my microphone, so that's going to totally destroy the audio from here on in. There's a lot of clouds in the sky. It's quite windy today as well. And there's a very heavy smell of smoke in the air. I don't know if that's coming from forest fires near here or from in BC yet. But the whole place smells like a campfire today. We've camped down here in Chain Lakes a couple different times over the years. It's actually a pretty nice campground, especially if you have access to a boat or a kayak and can go out and enjoy the lake. One of the weird things about it is there are no campfires of any sort allowed here. Now, that's not unusual. I mean, you're out in this open prairie and in an area where if a fire got away from you, it would go for a long, long way. And it's always windy down here, so I understand the fire risk. But they also don't allow propane fire pits, which is something that makes absolutely zero sense to me. We've used our propane fire pit on wooden decks out in the middle of farmers' fields and never really had any concern at all about fire hazard or anything. So it's kind of odd they don't even allow those down here. But time to get back on the road and continue our journey south. We have no real destination today. We're just kind of going wherever the wind literally blows us. Wow, that wind is intense. But I do believe this is the area known as the Livingstone Gap. I'm not super familiar with this area. We've been down here before, but we just enjoy it. We don't really know it. Dutch Creek. Haven't been in here for quite a while. I've camped here before too. Well, it's still windy, still a little bit of rain, but we are in Coleman, Alberta, and we are standing in front of the historic Cameron School. Now, there are certain places we always have to stop and check out when we are in the area, and the Cameron School here in Coleman is one of them. As you can see, it's not exactly in the best of shape anymore. It's certainly been the victim of a lot of vandalism over the years. And appears to be pretty secure though right now. So yes, the lower floors are all quite nicely boarded up. There are some open windows at the upper floor, and there's all this brick that's down here beside it. Now we assume this is related to the proposed construction project that is supposed to be taking place here. However, every time we drive by, it seems like that same brick has been here, and it doesn't actually seem like anything is happening with it. There's a heritage plaque on the door that I'm going to go up and take a look at here. So yeah, Cameron School, West Coleman, was originally its own town, amalgamated with Coleman in 1910. School was built in 1919, renamed to Cameron School in 1925 after Alex Cameron. So here's a look at the proposed construction. Kind of a look here at this diagram that's showing the existing school being integrated into a residential housing area, and the school being converted into housing units. Not really sure how long this has been a proposal or how long it's been since the plans were in place, but like I said, not much has happened with it since. A view here of the west side of the school. Again, quite nicely boarded up and protected, but has suffered tremendously over the years. I'm not sure if I would say despite or perhaps because of the residential plans for this site, I would still consider this to be a somewhat endangered historic site. And if you ever get... Is that recording? I can't see. Yes, it is. And if you ever get the chance to watch, I believe it's a Disney film called The Journey of Natty Gann, there are actually a number of scenes that were filmed inside the Cameron School. So you can actually get that, or you can use that film as an opportunity to see the inside of the school back when it was in much better condition. So we're going to take a drive through the rest of Coleman. There's a number of other great historical buildings in this town. It's still kind of rainy, very windy, so not sure how much we'll get out of the car and how much will just be drive-bys. But for now, from Cameron School, we are done here. So you saw on the sign outside of the school where it was talking about how they eventually blasted the rock cut, or through the rock cut, which allowed the communities of Coleman and West Coleman to amalgamate. Well, that shot there that we just came through was showing you that rock cut, and this right here is where they blasted through. So this was quite an obstacle back in the early 1900s, and had actually separated the two communities, but today they are all part of the MD of the Crowsnest Pass. I don't think they actually operate as individual towns anymore. Coleman, Blairmore, all of those. Of course, if I'm wrong, you can always tell me. So this building here is actually an old mine office. It's been nicely renovated and maintained over the years. The old fire hall here, 1934. So back down on Main Street here, kind of along the main rail line that runs through the Crowsnest Pass, and down there you can get a better look at that rock cut that we were talking about. And over here are the remains of an old mining operation, including these kilns here in the foreground. That area there is all fenced off, no access, so this is as close as we can get to it. There used to be a lot more ruins of the mine here, but they've been demolished fairly recently and lost to time. And here's a look at the historic sign for the Coleman Collieries. And you can see originally built in 1906 by the International Coal and Coke Company. And if you look down here, even as late as 2008, you can see what type of buildings were still here and present in the area. So just over a decade ago. So we're going to look east here down the main street of Coleman. You can see so many fantastic old buildings left over from the heyday of when this was a mining town. And one of my favorites is this gas station or service station here. It's got a lot of nice Art Deco touches to it, including this little round thing. There's my architectural lesson of the day up over the main entranceway, but just a fantastic service station sitting here on Main Street. So you can see a picture of it here on the plaque or on the sign that talks about how it was built in the late 30s. They call it Art Moderne, I guess, not necessarily Art Deco, but again, I'm not an architect or an architectural historian, but it was an Arctic gas station. Very great building here. And of course, if you've watched the channel for any length of time, you know we're big fans of ghost signs. Well, here is a classic ghost sign, but it's very unique. It's almost like the front half of this building was removed, and you can just read the second half of the sign where it basically says "This Shun." So obviously it was a service station. I don't know what happened to the front half of that ghost sign though. Here's a look on the other side of that service station. What would have been the front back in the day, where the pumps would have sat on the corner here. Just a quick drive down this block to let you get a look at some of the great old buildings here in Coleman. Some of them refurbished, some of them still sitting somewhat in their deteriorated, abandoned state, but lots of work is done with rehabilitating Main Street down here. Now, no trip to Coleman is complete unless you take a chance to drive by the old Roxy Theater and check out the classic Pepsi advertisement on its wall. Some great touches here with these decorative glass blocks set up, and the fantastic standard theater entrance, which was very much the style in that era, and the marquee. Across the road is the Grand Union Hotel, built in that very utilitarian style that was very much the hallmark of prairie hotels, even though we're not really on the prairies right here, but of the prairie hotels of the early 1900s. Over on this corner here, we have the former Zach's Meat Market building, built around 1910. Was originally a two-story building. According to the sign, the second story was removed sometime, they suspect, in the 1930s. A lot of Coleman was destroyed by a large fire in 1948, but this building survived and dates back to the era previous to that. Another building here very much looks like a former hotel, the classic false front on it. That's all I know. I haven't walked over there to read the sign. So, you know, it's a great building. What else do you need to know? Now, the last time we were in Coleman was a couple years ago, I believe. And most of Main Street was torn up and under construction. And you can see they've done a great job here with new sidewalks, new planters, some benches and things. They've really done a nice job in making Coleman here feel more welcoming to the type of people who aren't here just to look at old buildings like us. And it seems like almost every building in Coleman has these historic signs on them giving you the history of the building and often showing pictures of them from the heyday of the town. More towns really need to make efforts like this to promote and preserve their history. I mean, in terms of occupied towns, I don't know if you can find one with a density of historic wooden buildings quite as good as Coleman. They have done a nice job of protecting what's here. I mean, I have to say, as we take a look at the Roxy from across the road here, that even in the last 2 years since we were last here, Coleman really feels like a town on the upswing. I mean, obviously there's a long way to go, and no one's going to mistake this for downtown Calgary or anything, but the town just has a different vibe to it. Like, you can see that this is going to be an up-and-coming place here in the years to come. And why is it we don't give new buildings great names like Motor Drome? Just like not enough products use the words Omatic in their name anymore. But yes, originally a theater, heavily modified into a service station, and today sitting here in a somewhat derelict state. And for you young kids who may be watching, that is what's known as a phone booth, and how we used to communicate back before the age of cell phones. In my day, it was originally a 10-cent effort, or costs, I should say, to make a phone call. It jumped up to 25 cents, and I believe it was eventually 35. No idea what it costs today because I never need a phone booth. I had to check. Local calls are now 50 cents, and if we check, no dial tone. I don't know, maybe you only get a dial tone after you pay. It has been a long time since I've made a phone call out of a telephone booth or using a payphone. That's going to wrap it up from Coleman, one of our favorite towns down here in the southwestern corner of the province. Like I said, fantastic historic buildings, a town that feels like it's on the rise. Maybe you should invest in real estate here. I wish I could. So this stretch of road that we're actually driving down now was the original alignment of the highway, and all of this rock that you see deposited here came down off of Turtle Mountain in 1903. Yes, this is the famous Frank Slide. I remember driving through, not on this alignment, but on the main highway as a child, and actually having nightmares that night about falling rock simply because of the impact it had as a child of all the people of Frank that got buried underneath all this rock. And I was also strangely fascinated by the thoughts of there were remnants of buildings and things also underneath all this rock that never were recovered at all. It's still a fascinating sight. And while we won't be doing it on this trip, if you ever get a chance to check out the new, and I say new, it's probably been there for 30 years now, interpretive center that they built regarding the Frank Slide, highly recommended. So now the entire town of Frank was not buried under the slide, so there were a number of survivors, and a monument we had just stopped at back a little ways along this stretch of road was mentioning that some of those survivors, which were just young children at the time of the slide, actually lived up until the 1990s. It's amazing the power of nature that you're faced with when you look at a place like this. There are boulders in here that are the size of cars, boulders that are the size of houses, and it all just came crashing down in the early morning hours on that April day in 1903. I will just say, if you are coming through the Crowsnest Pass and driving Highway 3 through southern Alberta, you really owe it to yourself to get off the current alignment of the highway and take these realignments or these old alignments that run through the towns of Coleman and Blairmore and Hillcrest and Frank. There's a lot here to see, but you just got to get off the highway to truly experience it. Okay. We are now in Bellevue, Alberta, and we have driven up this somewhat sketchy road when you only have a Kia Rondo to come visit the Bellevue Cemetery. Now, I usually enjoy visiting old cemeteries, and I expect this will be no exception, but this is a new one on me. I have never been to this one before, so should be interesting to see. It's kind of up, like I said, a somewhat sketchy road. You could walk up as well, but we chose to drive it, and it's the first time coming up here to this one. A lot of these stones here appear to have shifted and toppled over the years, and there is apparently a geocache hidden in here somewhere. And in the notes for the cache page, it says that the cemetery, especially on the one end, is prone to flooding. So that could explain why we see some of these stones shifted and toppled the way they are. Okay, so thanks to some hints from the previous logs on the geocache page, the geocache being what led us here, I kind of got to come in this direction here and say hello to the Johnsons, Lavina and Richard Thomas, 1950 and I want to say 1928. Nice of them to share their spot here with this geocache container. This is a very unique cemetery. The location is quite interesting to begin with, and then the topography around here is also quite interesting. It's a very long and narrow cemetery, which is very different from other cemeteries I visited before, or we visited before, and just like I said, the geography and the topography around here, it's kind of nestled in this valley. I can see why the cache description talks about flooding. It also mentions that they were planning on doing some flood mitigation efforts in 2019, so I don't know if that ever happened or not. This one here, the wooden fence has fallen down and is now laying on the ground. There we go, that's a better look at it. Quite a place nestled here in this narrow little valley. Now, another tidbit I picked up from the cache description is apparently one of the robbers who had robbed a train just west of here, I believe it was west of here, and then fled and was hiding out in Bellevue and discovered at the Bellevue Cafe. One of those robbers is also apparently buried in this cemetery, but given the notorious nature of his crime, I believe there were 2 policemen killed, or 1 policeman killed and 2 of the robbers killed. Either way, I believe there were 3 deaths involved. Given the notorious nature of the crime, he was apparently buried in an unmarked grave. So somewhere out here, there's at least one unmarked grave, and given what happened in these places and how record keeping was done back in the day, I'm sure there are a lot more in here. This is something we don't see very often here, but a burial above ground in a crypt, more or less. 1944. Young fella too. There's a gate here that leads to a path. I wonder if this was originally the entrance from the town, that you would have walked up to the cemetery prior to the road being cut. Just guessing. Many unique markers and burials. This is another one here that appears to have been placed above ground. Annie Grosso, by the looks of it, 1938, I think it says. It's hard for me to read. These sunglasses are kind of an old prescription. It's nothing to do with getting old. Yeah, this one here, don't know if Bertha ever got buried here, or they just didn't have the funds to engrave the year of her death here with what I assume was her husband Albert. But that one there, date of death unmarked. It's always amazing to watch nature reclaim her territory here. This one here behind this fence, the tree has really grown up and has taken over the burial site. This was probably just a sapling when it was placed here for Joseph Robertson in 1926. Now, I had said when we started this trip that it was really unplanned, unscripted, and we were just going to see where the winds took us, and this was not even on the radar. In fact, prior to spotting this geocache on the map, I was not even aware of the existence of this cemetery. So it's a very interesting cemetery, one of the more interesting ones I think we have discovered or come across. So this was a really good stop, and it just shows how having flexibility when you're doing exploration trips and just kind of seeing where you end up can lead to some great discoveries. Okay, so yes, I had to check local coal. Good morning to you. Is that recording? Yes, it is.